Marcus of Bible Truth. So when you get a chance, go and look at this video. This is called Empire Files, Everyday Israel's Express Support for Genocide. They express support for genocide to Abby Martin. And it's called Empire Files. I want you to listen. She interviews a bunch of people, and all these people are convinced that they're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is amazing because you understand that Jacob had a twin brother named Esau. And Esau, you know, when you're twins, there's something about twins that everybody should know. Twins have the same parents. So if it's based on foolish genealogy, then that would make no sense because Esau had the same parents, mother and father, as Jacob. Now, the only thing that could explain why God would love one and hate the other, given that God's no respecter of person, is it talks about entering his love, entering his rest, and you got to be baptized into the bride of Christ, the body, which is a spiritual body. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, being found in him, having not mine own righteousness. Let whosoever come and take and drink of the water of life freely. So that would make sense that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob believed God. And it's not like this is a mystery because the Bible says the gospel preached before unto Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. And the Bible says being found in him, having not mine own righteousness. So apparently Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they all believe. So it's not talking about some carnal seed based on sperm. But these guys think that when their mom and their dad went into the room or whatever they did on the car, in the back seat, wherever, in the bushes, they think that when my parents had sex and made me, they made a child of God. And hence God gave us a land grant and we're supposed to be over here and we're supposed to take the land and drive other people out of the land because it's rightfully our land. Now, I want you to take note of this young girl who's talking. This young girl who's talking is talking as if she's one, as if she went through the Holocaust, quote unquote. And then two, and by the way, if you did go, say you survived the Holocaust, say you went through it. There's no biblical precedent saying, well, my people will go through the Holocaust. There's no Bible verse that says that. So you got to show me in the Bible how that's proof that you're God's children. And then two, if you say 6 million perish, well, that's interesting because God says my sheep, they never perish. So that's why it says they that are in the flesh can't please God, because God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. So if you perish, that means you're wicked. And since the Bible says all flesh is as grass and the glory of man is the flower grass, the grass withereth and the flower thereof falleth away. And Jesus said, my sheep never perish. That's why God says the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God. God's called the father of spirits. That's another thing. The other thing is a lot of these people who claim that they're so-called God's people, they say we're God's people and we keep the laws. Well, that's very interesting also because the Bible says the law is not for a righteous man, but the law is for criminals. There's nothing wrong with the law. It's just that the law is only needed for people who are disobedient criminals. You know, if you have a child and you got to give them more rules and more rules and more rules and more rules and more rules, you're not giving a bunch of rules to a child who's obedient. You're giving a bunch of rules to a child who's disobedient. But what God is saying is, unless you're born again, you're not my child. And that's why it says the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God. The other thing is, as you look at this woman who's talking and you look at her skin and you look at Abby's skin, I find it very hard to believe that this woman, if they're going to base it on the flesh, could pass for what? An Egyptian. You remember that in Egypt, Joseph was able to pass for an Egyptian. And Moses married an Ethiopian woman. And at the so-called Mount Sinai, there was supposedly a what? Mixed multitude. Now, since they don't want to acknowledge that it's all by spirit and not by flesh, then how do you explain the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt? And how does she know of the twin brothers? You can't take a genetic test and say, well, based on this genetic test, I'm a Jew. Okay, but are you hated? Because according to what the Bible teaches, it says a Jew is not one outwardly, but inwardly, and circumcision is that by the heart and the spirit. That is not by the flesh at all. And so how would you know, based on genes, given that Jacob and Esau have the exact same genes, that you're loved or hated? And also, it makes no sense because Jesus said, I come but for the lost sheep of the household of Israel. And he says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them. I give unto them eternal life. They never perish. So there is no way, guys, in the world they can know all this. But if somebody's lying to you under the guise of fulfilling prophecy and they decided to kill some people so that they can take your image, and you see the image that this image is, right? You notice that the skin of this person who claims to be a Jew is the same skin of Abby Martin. And so all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that Hitler thought that these people were what? Based on eugenics, these people were supposed to be closer, they're supposed to be the most hated. Beyond the people who they identify as black, these are supposed to be the most hated people. So was Hitler, I never, in all the pictures I saw of Hitler, I never saw him wearing glasses. But apparently he was colorblind. Now let's go ahead and play this.
And they started making it better for also the Arabs, and they only start to be an issue because the Arabs started to make it more of an issue.
How many people think like you? What is the state of the left wing within Israeli society?
So the people who think like me are a negligible few, and I would argue that there is no left in Israel and never ever existed. What you have are those self-proclaimed leftists, liberal Zionists, who basically speak the language of peace and human rights and so on in order to sugarcoat their racism and supremacy.
That's a strong statement. He says there's people who know how to speak the language and is only false opposition to sugarcoat and give cover. You know how America, when you hear us talk about people who say they're liberal, you know, the bleeding heart liberal, and they speak that liberal language. You know, you had Bill Clinton's wife who was talking about someone who carried hot sauce in her pocket, and she tried to say, "Oh, just like I got hot sauce in my pocket." And then you come to find out that under the Clintons, they did the laws that incarcerated more black people than all the previous presidents who people are assigned to be conservatives, right? And so basically what they're saying is they're like that they're saying that people are pretending to be liberal, but they're not really liberal. Their liberalness is just a cover. That they're pretending to be, hey, I'm for you. It's playing this right-left paradigm, but this right-left paradigm is false, right? It's very interesting.
And they speak a very different language than the acting government, for example, because the acting government is clearly a right-wing government. They are shameless about their racist attitudes and so on. They say this is ours and only ours. Many of them are decent enough to say, yes, there was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Yeah, there were. See, this is exactly what you have in America, guys. You say you got one president comes in, he talks very blatant, and then they say, okay, now that we've gotten the blatant guy out, let's pretend we're getting the liberal one in. And then we'll get even a person who looks a certain way. We'll even get a so-called black president. The black president gets in there, Obama, supposedly black, right? I don't really believe in race, but whatever. We get that person in, who people identify as black. And you know what Obama does? Does he give reparations to the descendants of slaves? No. What does Obama do in his time in the White House? He gives $38 billion, the largest military package to the state of Israel. And is the state of Israel, based on the conversation that you're going to hear in this thing, in this video, are they all about human rights? No. But Obama, he won what? Didn't he win like a Nobel Peace Prize or something, guys? So do you see how it's a setup? Do you see how you win awards here? Do you see how things that you think are one way are actually another? Makes no sense, right? He gave $38 billion to military aid to Israel. And Israel is known for violating human rights. There's no question about it, guys. And this guy is exposing, he's spilling the beans. That yeah, there's this facade of liberalness who know how to speak the language that they speak is a cover. And so they pretend to be false opposition so that you don't speak out because you think somebody's on your side. I got a feeling that's happening in a lot of other areas, avenues. And I'm talking in medicine and forced vaccines. Like there's always someone who's pretending to be fighting and you're like, oh, they got this, they're doing the fight. So you kind of lay back in the cut and say, well, I'm glad we got some people fighting for us. And really those people are pretending to fight only so that you don't take up action to fight, because really they're creating an illusion so that you think there's opposition. That's all it is.
And that's a good thing. The problem is that we haven't finished the job, that there are still Palestinians left in Palestine. With the other type of Zionists, with the so-called left in Israel, we cannot even agree about the basic facts. But for them, in order to feel that they are both Zionist and moral at the same time, they have to keep lying to themselves all the time, every moment of every day. So they have perfected this whole discourse of lies in order to lie to themselves and also in order to lie to the international community, in order to justify their existence here in that.
I think the occupation...
I want you to hear that again.
State of the left wing within Israeli society.
So the people who think like me are a negligible few, and I would argue that there is no left in Israel and never ever existed. What you have are those self-proclaimed leftists, liberal Zionists, who basically speak the language of peace and human rights and so on in order to sugarcoat their racism and supremacy. And they speak a very different language than the acting government.
What did he say? Their racism and supremacy? Now, you saw the person who was in the interview, and you saw the color skin that person had, and this guy, he says he's a Jew, and you look at the color skin that he has. And guys, come on, give me a break now. Let's stop playing. I just want to know, is Hitler colorblind? That's all I want to know. Because Hitler hated Eastern Europeans, supposedly, and I'm sorry, on the spectrum of colors, would you classify him? Let's play the game, guys. Would you classify him as black? No. Brown? No. Red? No. Yellow? No. White? Bingo. That's what you'd classify him as. I don't care what, like, I didn't invent the category, but that's what you'd classify him as. But wait a minute, let's invent another more confusing category to try to hide the agenda. How about we include the color Jew? Is there a color called Jew in your Crayola crayon box? No, there is not. No, there is not. So what do you think is going on? Why do you think the British and Americans are so supportive? And then they make you think everything's all great because they had Obama as president, right? And then Trump, you know, he got in there. But Trump was still, everybody did the bidding. Obama gets in, throws $38 billion in military aid. Trump gets in, declares Israel, the head of Jerusalem, as whatever he did, declared Israel to be the whatever. And I think moved the embassy over there. So that's all moving towards the agenda. And meanwhile, while they're doing this agenda, the people who live there are proving that they have these beliefs of race and racism that's running rampant. But this is supposed to be a light to all nations. And on top of that, this is a place where people talking about we believe in the law. Except when it says love thy neighbor as thyself and all that kind of, you know. You believe in the law, not keeping any of the law, but we believe in the law. And now they're trying to say that, well, we think that we should be the light. We're a light to, how are you a light? A light to do what? When you light, do you mean light meaning like, seriously, what do you mean by that?
For example, because the acting government is clearly a right-wing government, they are shameless about their racist attitudes and so on. They say this is ours and only ours. Many of them are decent enough to say, yes, there was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and that's a good thing. The problem is that we haven't finished the job, that there are still Palestinians left in Palestine. With the other type of Zionists, with the so-called left in Israel, we cannot even agree about the basic facts. But for them, in order to feel that they are both Zionist and moral at the same time, they have to keep lying to themselves all the time, every moment of every day. So they have perfected this whole discourse of lies in order to lie to themselves and also in order to lie to the international community, in order to justify their existence here in that.
I think the occupation does have a big role and important. I don't think there should be no occupation at all, but in the occupation things needs to be more human.
Do you get called a leftist a lot?
Yeah, I am a leftist.
Is leftist a slur sometimes?
Yes, it is. It is not a good way to be called in Israel.
Israel doesn't want to compromise on security. They have to do a blockade. They have to kind of cut this off. It's ridiculous what people have to go through there, but it's also ridiculous what we have to do to keep ourselves safe.
We don't want to fight with them. But if they ask for it, they will get it. And we're much stronger, much stronger. We are behave very gently and morally, very gently with them.
It could get a lot worse, is what you're saying.
If the Russians was here, 2 days, they will kill all of them. If the American will be here, they will kill them 2 days. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about nothing.
Israel's holding back.
Very, very.
But it's war, and civilians get killed in war, and it's a horrible, on their side, less on our side, but at the same time, we put money into protecting ourselves.
Well, look, the refugees, their situation is horrible, but no other nation in the world gets the refugee status that Palestinians do. The Palestinians, third generation people, are still considered refugees.
You know, I had friends that were Canadian. They went on their passports. They wanted to see what the refugee camps were. They wanted to see what it was all about. They came back. They said it's nothing what I imagined it.
Like better than they imagined? Or?
They said people were driving around with nice cars. People had nice houses, villas, things like that. They thought people were being oppressed, like, you know, like living in tents. It's like they probably were, like maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, like in the past.
For them, in order for them to be Zionist and moral, in order for them to have a Jewish and democratic state, they needed, first of all and foremost, to create a Jewish majority by force, by driving away the indigenous people from their land. And this is how the state was founded. And immediately afterwards, they created a whole legal system that will make sure that those who have been expelled will never be allowed back, and those who remained on their land, because not everyone was expelled, will never be equal citizens. Unfortunately, what we hear on mainstream media, this so-called discourse or so-called debate between the right and the left is about that. It's about, do we want a large Israel, which is Arab-free, or do we want a small Israel, which is Arab-free? This is the debate that's taking place.
Last question. There's this whole international movement of leftists and...
It's like, you know, and think about it. It's just like when the conquest of the Americas, the Indian Removal Act. You know, it's always coming to other people's land and removing them. And people are like, who signed this declaration? Oh, the British. Oh, the British, huh? Oh, and who's helped us support it? The offspring of the British, the United States. So, do you really believe that the British and the United States are really truly enemies to each other? No, they're allies to each other. Maybe the British Empire pretended to be conquered when they actually weren't really conquered. It was just a consolidation of powers through the EU, right? It was just all a consolidation of power. So they're playing this game as if it's these different independent states, but actually they're all working in cahoots, guys. That's why it's called British Israelism.
Activists who want to boycott Israel for human rights violations, being here, seeing that, and what do you just think about that?
I think the BDS movement, the leaders of the BDS movement, or everyone that thinks that Israel is bad, if they should read up about the topic, the other side, and they should come here and see how everybody's comfortable.
People right now, they're looking at Israel and they're calling it an apartheid state. And Israel is not an apartheid state. There's places, I mean, my family from 5 generations ago, they were from Jenin. You can't find one Jew in Jenin right now. I mean, it's totally Jew-free. So if you want to think about a racist apartheid state, it seems it's more, in my opinion, coming from their side.
And just a response, I guess, to kind of this international movement, the BDS movement, and also the movement that says settlements are illegal, they're encroaching on Palestinian land. Can you respond to that accusation?
I think the response would be two-part. The first part would be very simple. Nobody gives Turkey problems for their settlements in Cyprus. It's an anti-Semitic thing. Maybe they don't know that they hate Jews, but they give us so much trouble. The UN only talks about Israel. What about North Korea? What about Russia?
See, that's the standard. That's the standard. Hey, other people are doing it. Okay, what about rape? Well, you know, why are people complaining about us raping people? R. Kelly's doing it. You know, all these other people are doing it in Hollywood, you know? It's just like, guys, there's no way you can listen to this and think, this is the light to all nations. These are the people who are talking about some of the law, we keep the Torah and all this kind of stuff. You know it's bogus, right? You know it's bogus. You know it's a colonization scam, right?
Then the second thing would be to say is that...
Even from the UN?
Completely from the UN. I mean, come on. You're talking about that we're worse than the North Korean dictatorship? Like, nobody in the world thinks that. So those people in the UN and all these peace activists, I mean, look, she's a woman. She's walking around however she wants here in Israel, right? There's female genital mutilation in Egypt, not very far from here. Why don't people talk about that?
I think that, like, we should have not more rights. I think we have rights to build more houses for our citizens. And like a lot of things that Israel gets criticism for, other countries will never get it.
אני רוצה להגיד פה לראש ממשלה פה בארץ, בישראל, אין מצב שיהיה פה שלום בארץ. אי אפשר לעשות איתם שלום, הם תמיד שונאים אותנו. אם אי אפשר לעשות שלום והמצב ככה לא יכול להישאר, אז צריך לטפל בהם בדרכים אחרות, אין מה לעשות.
It's irrelevant. The views of Israelis about the situation are totally irrelevant to the question of how do we change the situation. Did it matter what white people think about apartheid in South Africa at the time? The question is, how do we end apartheid and how do we end Israeli crimes? You know, every Israeli official will...
Well, the reason they need to take a poll is because they're trying to get a sentiment to figure out how they're going to brainwash you. When you want to do the right thing is not based on whether people believe it, right? You can believe a whole hell of a lot of stuff that's not right and not true, because apparently people think they're God's chosen people because their mom and dad had sex. All right, that's completely bogus, but a lot of people believe it. And they believe that it's a miracle that they got into the land despite all the money, military forces, and killing and bloodshed that's been doing. And they think they're God's chosen people even though they still perish in the promised land. So God promised them a land in which they perish in. Right. And they believe, somehow, they believe that they know that they're the descendants of Jacob and not Esau, who were twin brothers, based on genealogy, but they were twin brothers. I mean, I don't think you can get more foolish and silly and ignorant than that. That's pretty stupid, right? But that's what we have. And people believe it because the government's telling them to believe it, right? Is it not true the government's telling them? Is it not true that they're trying to claim that the government's against them, but Obama gave $38 billion to Israel for defense. And on top of that, Trump said that he declared Jerusalem the capital city of Israel or something like that, whatever he did. So there's been support from all these presidents time after time, no matter whether they're so-called liberal or conservative. So it's bogus. It's all bogus. And it's just like that guy said, like there's just the illusion of contradiction, but there's not really, people aren't really contradicting. They're not really against them. They're pretending to be against them.
They will claim to speak on behalf of the Jewish people and will even demand of Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state and so on. I don't recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state because it is not Jewish by religion. It is only Jewish by supremacy. Israel is Jewish just like South Africa was white, in the exact same context, with the exact same meaning.
So see, you get that? But you're looking at this guy's skin. He's talking about Jewish and he's sugar and white. Guys, you're looking at his skin, and you're looking at Abby's skin, and you're looking at the kid and the girlfriend who were just talking. And if you saw them in America, guys, walking, you would think they were like two grunge people or something. Like you would not be like, oh, yeah. You'd have to do something to make people think that you're something. Like, there's no way you'd look at their skin and be like, oh, yeah, what color is that? Oh, that's... You go to the paint department and say, hey, I'm looking at a color to paint my room. And then when you look at the color to paint your room, say, what color would you like? Oh, please paint it the color Jew. And watch how they look at you like you're an idiot. But see, that's how blind people are.
And obviously any decent person around the world should oppose that because it is inherently racist and more than that. And it also happens to be very much against international law. So when we talk about Israel as an apartheid...
International law started by Woodrow Wilson, the League of Nations started by Woodrow Wilson, which became the United Nations, was started by a racist. So this is a thing where they pretend to come and we're going to police the world, but really they're there to stack the deck.
State, even though it's not exactly like South Africa, it neatly falls under the legal definition of the crime of apartheid, which is a very serious crime, one of the few crimes that is regarded...
Isn't it weird how it's a crime, but they can't enforce it? The crime that they can't enforce.
It's a crime against humanity, which means that all countries of the world are obligated to do something against it, not to be complicit in that. And
they see how helpless they are. It's just like Obama. You know, he's helpless to give reparations, but he wasn't helpless to give $38 billion to Israel. Do you see how it works, guys? Is anybody catching on? Are you catching on? See, America has a lot of enemies like China, but then America sends the manufacturing base to China. But they're our enemies. They're always complaining that the Chinese are the threat to America's industry and manufacturing is China, and we're supposed to vilify China. But okay, if that's the case, then why you send so much manufacturing over there? Apple and all these different places are made in China. Nike. Isn't that very interesting, guys, how that works?
What we're coming and saying is, no, there are basic fundamental Palestinian rights that must be respected. One of them is ending of the occupation, of course, but that's not the main issue. That's part of the issue. The other...
They could just live together. You know, that's I guess that's not really an option, though. You know, it sounds like segregation.
Two rights are equality inside Israel proper, or what we call Palestine 48, and the rights of the refugees which are being expelled from there since the very foundation of the State of Israel. These are fundamental rights, they must be respected. And now we can debate, we can argue about how do we implement these rights. I'm willing to discuss that. I'm not willing to discuss,
Then nothing's going to happen because the government's in on it. The United States is supporting it. The United Nations is in on it. They're pretending to be against it, but they're actually for it. So I'm going to let it go at that. I just want you guys to see this. Hopefully you understand what's going on, guys. This is very clear and very evident. You heard it from him. It's not me saying it. He's the one talking about racist supremacists and all this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at Abby. I mean, I'm trying to understand. I mean, isn't it weird? I'm looking at this guy. I'm looking at skin color, guys. It's really weird. You know, they're trying to convince you that they want you to see the miracle, but then they're trying to tell you not to see the obvious. That the people who are claiming to be God's chosen race look a certain way. Okay, all right.